grief resonance or the snowball. Snowball colon grief resonance. I had talked about joy resonance leading to magic, how we can enter these cycles of joy and experience magic. I have seen it at work, I believe in it. But then there's a counterpart to that, and that is grief resonance. That is when we enter a feedback loop where we increase the negativity in ourselves. And those are situations that can also lead to a sort of anti-magic, major breakdowns. I have experienced times in life where I did feel like quitting in the ultimate way, just living this life to escape what seemed to be an escapable situation. So what can we do in those situations? What do we do? And I'm gonna come next to that. Snowball colon grief resonance colon catastrophe. When we talk about resonance before, I used the example of the Tacoma Bridge, which is one of the most infamous examples of a system going into resonance with destructive effects. And of course, we are human beings and we are much more complex, but there are situations where we narrow our abilities out of fear, out of pain, out of suffering, and we respond in rather limited ways because we just don't have the resources available. It's like when we are sick and our body become weaker. We cannot get up because we have a high fever, and I had this weekend just an experience where I went into a snowball where more and more negative things increase the size of the snowball, and it can be really overwhelming. And in those situations, it's hard to think positively. And if you're talking to a friend, trying to help, like I was doing today, telling somebody to be positive is rather difficult because it's not the moment to do that. We don't have the resources to be positive in moments like that. But we do have some capabilities. One thing that happens is that when we are suffering, when we're in pain, we have this snowball that is rolling downhill, and we can make an effort to direct the snowball to less steep slopes. What we do is the opposite. We tend to give ourselves feedback about things that happened in the past. We tell ourselves, oh, if I had done this or had done that, I wouldn't be in this situation. If I had made that decision earlier, or if I had done this or that, change jobs, get that degree, or even smaller things, if I hadn't taken that plane, or if I had taken it. And that makes us feel more grief. That makes the snowball bigger because we're taking a steep slope that goes downhill. Or we think about the future, about all the things that can go wrong. We tend to reinforce ourselves into this negativity and think of the snowball. It's coming downhill fast, it's big, and you cannot stop it. You cannot just be positive and push the snowball uphill or just stop it on its tracks. It's gonna continue to go downhill. But what happens if you direct the snowball to a place with less steep slopes, to a place where the slopes are flatter? So then the snowball slows down and it doesn't gain in size that much. And maybe it starts shedding snow and ultimately stops. It is going to stop ultimately. Most people are aware of this Buddhist mantra that everything is called anicca in Pali, the language of the Buddha. And we translate it sometimes the wrong way. We tend to say that everything ends. And we interpret that in the Western world, especially, as a very negative thing. We think in terms that love is going to end, life is going to end, happiness is going to end. But we also have to remember that that means that negative things end, illness ends, injury ends most of the time. We heal even when we wake up. When a relationship ends, the grief ends. Grief ends. The important thing is to keep the grief feedback from making it worse. It's the opposite of when we are in joy resonance, that we keep feeding this resonance, and that's when magic happens. When we are in a grief resonance, the feedback now is making things worse and worse, and it can be catastrophic. We can get sick. I've been sick out of grief resonance. We can make really bad decisions. So I'm going to take another pause. Snowball, grief resonance. Maybe I should be more specific about what happened to me this weekend. I was living for 50 days in rather demanding conditions. Living in the Amazonia like a local person in a very small apartment with just a fan, no air conditioning, lots of noise. The air conditioning is just outside the window for a different building. In part, I wanted to experience whether it was possible to live without air conditioning, and I believe it is possible, but you must have cross currents in your space. The river really cools down at night. But when you have a metal roof and poor ventilation, it's overwhelming during the day. And so I was never during the day in that place. But that forced me to spend all day by the river. That sometimes maybe that's not exactly where I wanted to be. But and there was the noise and people living there paying $100 a month for rent. They are poor people. There were two families living in the same kind of space I had. And I think maybe both of them actually didn't have a window. So they're in an enclosed space with just a fan. Both families had a little girl. Those are horrid conditions to live in. And then because of some personal problems, because I complain about people making noise, especially a neighbor next door who kept a very loud TV, and we had an altercation. He just, I asked him to keep the TV lower, and he just to turn it higher, and I knocked his door really hard, and I was asking him to turn down the TV, and blah blah blah, and then basically I was asking to leave the place, and because my standards were too high for the way people want to live. And I understand that. People are suffering and they need to numb themselves with loud TVs and other forms of distraction to drown their fear. But it was hard. It was a personal altercation. I was insulted really bad in more than one form, and I didn't respond to that. It could have been violent. It wasn't. Then I was very stressed about finding a new place and moving. Incredibly, moving became a big deal because I had settled down into a routine and I had my stuff. This dream other people have shared when you are trying to leave a place and you keep leaving stuff behind and you're trying to carry all your stuff. I don't know how many people have this nightmare. I know some people who have it. I think it's very common, this feeling of being stuck somewhere because of stuff. So and then I started doing the snowball thing, taking steeper slopes by thinking about what I could have done differently, where I should have left this place earlier. Now, in retrospect, I realized no, it's okay to have stayed because I needed this experience. I made 100 recordings out of the experience of having been here, forced by the river and the daily negativity for 50 days. It was paradise by the river, a natural paradise, and then it was the human abjection of the place where I live and the neighborhood. Two horrid streets leading, two horrid blocks, the last two blocks getting there, and they were really miserable. And I hope to ever and never ever again walk those streets. And I was aware that I was sleeping. I was this snowball kept growing, and I kept feeding it with thinking about the past, and it's so hard to stop it. You cannot. I can, despite all the tools I have, and I couldn't just meditate properly. I couldn't just stop it and make it positive. There's no. We lose the resources to make it positive. It's like a virus infecting us, and we are fighting it. But it's not the time to take on another virus. It's not the time to take a long run or a long swim, or we cannot do it. And that's what's happening to the mind when this snowball is growing. And again, the thing is to stop the reinforcement and to embrace the change forced upon us. Maybe what we are losing is something that, yes, we have a loss, but maybe we are going to replace it with something better. Then I have this really dear friend who's, because of this pandemic, she hasn't had income for over 2 months. And she's really suffering and worried. She's okay now materially, but the mental suffering is overwhelming to realize that situation. And being in her late 30s, she feels frustrated that she cannot provide better for her kids, that so many paths she have followed in life have failed. And talking to her, I realized that that's when I started talking about the snowboard with her to try to help her with this image, because she kept talking about past decisions. If she had done this or that, if she had finished that degree she was pursuing, or if she hadn't spent this much money on some other degree she was getting now, if she hasn't moved there or moved here or done this. And that becomes torture because we start doubting every past decision we made, and then the future we become very negative. It's like when I was forced to move. I moved to a much better place. I'm really happier here. It's quieter. I have air conditioning. I have a TV right now on, and I'm resting, and I'm feeling much better, much better. But then I wasn't seeing it because I was seeing the loss, and then the future becomes tainted negatively. I felt that no matter what I did, coming to a new place, I was going to encounter similar conditions of noise, of inhospitality, and that hasn't proven right. But when I just 48 hours ago, I was trapped into this negative cycle, and it was very hard to escape. Actually, yeah, I was 48 hours ago was when I just Saturday. Today is Monday. Saturday morning is when I found this place, and so my friend, she was trapped, not trapped, but the snowboard kept getting bigger because the snowboard is going downhill, and she's directing the snowboard into steeper slopes by thinking about perceived past failures and perceived future failures too, future disappointments, future expectations not being met, expectations not being met in the future. And so she felt better after we talked because of this snowball. I didn't even mention grief resonance. I think that's too much. It's the kind of thing that maybe we can absorb outside of a situation like this. When we are in that situation, even myself, when I was this weekend in that situation, I wasn't thinking grief resonance. I'm gonna use the snowball image for myself in the future, and maybe what do you do with a snowball that is going downhill? Get out of the way, or is it, if it's really a snowball, maybe we cannot do anything about it. It's just gonna continue to go. But I believe that we can do something about it. The image is not, is no interior snowball that in our minds, and we cannot really control it completely. We cannot change the nature of being a speeding snowball, but I think we can direct it to less pernicious paths. So yes, there's joy resonance leading to magic, and we can find ways to enter this joy resonance and have magic. I don't know what image will be good in that case, something that accelerates and provokes growth, like putting a seed in the ground and then it starts growing, and suddenly it has very explosive growth. It goes through the surface, and the seed becomes a plant, a different being, and that's a miracle of its own. And they always remember impermanence. Impermanence is not only meaning that happiness always ends, and love always ends, and life always ends. Impermanence also means that suffering ends, and illness ends. Maybe there's once when life ends, the negative situations don't exist. Also having gratitude for when we are not sick, being aware of when we are healthy, being aware of when things are good, and remembering that sometimes the accumulated suffering might be compensated, and most likely will be compensated in the future by the situation where we are better, like I am now, having been over 24 hours in much better living conditions out of something that was very negative.